28. There had been no improvement with his breakfast. The ham and fried eggs still tasted of fish. But Rabe didn't want to bring it up with Liang, his cook again. A substitute cook was a substitute cook, and until the war was over, he didn't have the time to go about finding a permanent professional cook. Besides, Liang had probably, sincerely, tried his best. The way things were going, even Herr Kisling wouldn't be able to come up with anything tastier. Even the bakery had been looted, and there was nothing nice left to cook. After breakfast, Rabe went directly to his car and started toward his front gate. As the gate was opened, throngs of women and children were kneeling on both sides of the driveway. "Please let us in, mister." They prostrated themselves before him. "Please help us, mister. We have nowhere to go." Their voices were full of despair. "We'll never forget your kindness." The young mother with the baby crying in her arms, the girl with the messy hair and soot-blackened face, the elderly woman whose gray, cotton-padded clothes were already torn. They would all be dead. Rabe exited the car and told the servant to hold the gate open. "We have more than 500 inside already, sir," said the servant. "We'll manage." The servant opened the gate wide as the group of women and children helped each other to their feet and shuffled slowly toward the gate. As they approached Rabe, they bowed deeply, almost afraid to touch him as if he were some kind of a living deity, but mumbling gratefully as they passed into the compound. With the gate closed behind him, Rabe headed toward Ninghai Road. When he reached headquarters, several of the Safety Zone and International Red Cross Nanking branch members were already there. He got to work right away. As had been expected, things had been getting worse. All the shelling and bombing they had experienced during the months before the Japanese entered the city were but a prelude to the horrors taking place now. Thousands of disarmed former Chinese soldiers had been rounded up and butchered outside the safety zone. At least 50 police officers he had hired to maintain order within the safety zone had been escorted out of the zone and shot. Countless numbers of women and young girls had been raped or murdered. All shops outside the safety zone had been smashed open and looted. Worse, reports of pillage, rape, murder, and disorder inside the safety zone were increasing. Even houses displaying American, British, or German flags had been broken into. All houses occupied by German military advisors had been looted. There were so many problems to be taken care of, but so many were beyond his abilities. There was little he could do to stop the Japanese from rounding up former Chinese soldiers and murdering them in large numbers. He had to focus on the thousands of refugees inside the safety zone. No Chinese dared set foot in the streets now, let alone try to make it to a refugee center. Rabe went over to his typewriter, put a clean sheet of paper in it, and decided to write a letter to Takuyasu Fukuda, attaché to the Japanese embassy, right away. "Mr. Takuyasu Fukuda, attaché to the Japanese embassy, Nanking. Dear Sir, yesterday the continued disorders committed by Japanese soldiers in the safety zone increased the state of panic among the refugees. Refugees in the large buildings are free to go to nearby soup kitchens to secure the cooked rice. Consequently, we're having to deliver rice to these compounds directly, thereby complicating our problem. We could not even get coolies out to load rice and coal to take to our soup kitchens, and therefore this morning thousands of people had to go without their breakfast." He paused. Rabe knew he had to present in unambiguous terms the severity of the situation, without in any way offending the attaché and other officials at the Japanese embassy. Simply put, he needed their understanding and cooperation to solve the problem. Besides, these embassy people hadn't shown themselves to be as barbaric as their military counterparts. From his dealings with them weeks ago about setting up the safety zone and his sporadic contacts with them in the last few days, he knew that the embassy staff had been unprepared for the brutality of the military operation. Rabe continued. Foreign members of the International Committee are this morning making desperate efforts to get trucks through Japanese patrols so these civilians can be fed. Yesterday, foreign members of our committee had several attempts made to take their personal cars away from them by Japanese soldiers. A list of cases of disorder is appended. Until this state of panic is allayed, it is going to be impossible to get any normal activity started in the city, such as telephone workers, electric plant workers, probably the water plant workers, shops of all kinds, or even street cleaning. Just then, Rabe's office assistant came in to tell him that Mr. Kikuchi, the interpreter for the Japanese embassy, was at the door. Please tell Mr. Kikuchi I'll be with him shortly. He has this note for you, the assistant said, handing Rabe a piece of paper. The so-called safety zone shall be searched for Chinese soldiers. Rabe already knew that the army had commenced their mobbing-up campaign as soon as they entered the city. This piece of paper merely served as a courtesy note to legitimize their actions so they could conduct operations on a much larger scale. Rabe took a deep breath and continued to type. We refrained from protesting yesterday because we thought when the High Commander arrived, order in the city would be restored. But last night was even worse than the night before, so we decided these matters should be called to the attention of the Imperial Japanese Army, which we're sure does not approve of such actions by its soldiers. Most respectfully yours, John Rabe, Louis S. C. Smith, Chairman, Secretary. Rabe then walked into the reception room where Mr. Kikuchi stood up to shake hands warmly. The interpreter was wearing a dark wool overcoat. The smile on his face was genuine, and he was every bit as modest, polite, and charming as any other young man Rabe had ever met. Mr. Rabe, the young interpreter said, the note that I have just delivered is for the Imperial Army. I understand. What I'm here really for, Kikuchi hesitated, is to have your cooperation to get electricity and water running again as soon as possible. That, Mr. Kikuchi, depends on two things, Rabe said. One, the machineries at the electricity plants having not been destroyed by bombing and shelling. Two, he coughed to clear his throat. The safety of the Chinese workers must be guaranteed. Given the incredible behavior of the Japanese soldiers during the past few days, I'm afraid not too many Chinese workers will be very eager to go and fix things and get the machines running again. There is no denying, Kikuchi said in a lower voice, his face flushing with a noticeable embarrassment, that the behavior of some of our troops has not been the most exemplary in the last few days, but in the interest of I'll see what I can do if the Japanese army will guarantee the safety of Chinese workers. In a few minutes, they were already on Sun Yat-sen Boulevard North on their way to Lower Pass Dock, where the main power plant was located. They sat in the car silently, their eyes probing the now empty street. Neither said anything for a long time. Mr. Kikuchi, Rabe broke the silence finally. When do you think all this mess will be cleared away? I don't really know, the young man said, but I hope soon. Right now the Imperial Army is otherwise occupied, and he stuttered. I know, but I also hope that they will at least let others do it. You know the Chinese Red Swastika Society associated with our committee? Yes, I have heard of it. A charity organization. Well, they want to mobilize all of its members to go out and bury the dead, but they have been forbidden to do so. That's something I just don't understand. The dead deserve the decency of a burial. When the dead are properly taken care of, the city would return to some sort of normalcy again. Wouldn't that reflect well on the Japanese army? I agree. However, Mr. Rabe, I can't help wondering sometimes. Go ahead. Forgive me, but why are you, a German, taking such risk on behalf of the Chinese? Nanking is also my home. I beg your pardon, the interpreter said, blushing. The power plant had been abandoned for over a week now. Cars, wheelbarrows, willow baskets, and shovels for conveying coal and cinder were scattered about. Luckily, though, except for the roof's missing shingles and the walls being marked by clusters of bullet holes, the buildings and the chimneys still stood intact. Inside, the generators, controls, electrical transformers, gauges, and other equipment looked intact too. It could be running again within days, Rabe said, but we'll need at least one engineer and 40 to 50 workers to make things happen. That's the problem. Given the behavior of the Japanese, finding workers to run the plant would be next to impossible. The chances of finding a competent engineer would be very slim too. He could probably call on one of the German engineers in Shanghai, but not until things quieted down in Nanking. Right now, it wasn't safe for anyone, Germans included. I'll report back to the Consul General and see what we can do about it, Kikuchi said. Later that afternoon, Reverend Magee came knocking on the door. He carried his portable motion picture projector. I just got this delivered. It's what I have filmed so far. Rabe and Magee drew the curtains. As Magee mounted the reel, the projector began to roll in Rabe's darkened office. Magee narrated the scene. This was an 11-year-old girl standing with her parents near a dugout in the refugee zone as the Japanese entered the city. The soldiers killed her father with a bayonet, her mother with a rifle shot, and gave the girl a horrible slash in the elbow with a bayonet. This is the corpse of a boy about 7 years old who died 3 days after admission into Dr. Wilson's hospital. He had 5 bayonet wounds in the abdomen, one of them perforating the stomach. Here is the corpse of a man who has been taken from the agriculture hall of the University of Nanking with about 70 others who were all bayoneted or sprayed first with a rifle fire, then with gasoline and set afire. Here is a clerk in an animal shop who was bayoneted in the head simply because he could not produce any cigarettes while Japanese soldiers demanded them. The wound was so severe it cracked open the skull, and you could see the brain. Here are 2 Buddhist nuns who were raped by a gang of Japanese soldiers. The little one, apparently an apprentice, only 8 or 9 years old, was bayoneted several times in the back after the rape. The 60-ish nun was shot in both legs. Both nuns were left in the temple to die. The horror of an 8-year-old girl has been put through. A gang of 30-some Japanese soldiers come to the Hall house in the southwestern part of the city and demand entrance. When Mr. Hall, the landlord, a Mohammedan, opens the door, they kill him immediately with a revolver shot. Then they took Mr. Shaw, the 8-year-old's father, whose family is in hiding in the Hall's house and who has knelt before the Japanese begging them not to kill anyone else. Crying over her husband's still warm body, Mrs. Ha asks the Japanese why they have killed her husband. A soldier puts a bullet into her head. Mrs. Shaw, the girl's mother, is dragged out from under a table in the guest hall where she has tried to hide with her 1-year-old baby. After being stripped and raped by the soldiers right on the spot, she is bayoneted in the chest and then has a bottle thrust in her vagina. The baby is sliced in two with a bayonet. Several of the soldiers then go to the next room where the 8-year-old girl's grandparents, aged 76 and 74, and her 2 elder sisters, aged 16 and 14, are hiding. They drag the girls from under the bed and are about to strip them when the grandmother tries to intervene. She's killed with a revolver shot, as is the grandfather with his dead wife's body in his arms. The 2 girls are each raped by 2 or 3 soldiers repeatedly. Afterwards, the younger girl is bayoneted to death while the other girl is stabbed and subjected to the same horrible treatment as her mother, this time using a sharp cane. Then the Japanese soldiers go after the remaining people in the room, the 8-year-old girl and Ha's 2 small children, aged 5 and 2 respectively. The 5-year-old is bayoneted to death while the 2-year-old is cut in half from the neck down. Miraculously, the 8-year-old survives with a bayonet wound. She crosses to the next room where lie the bodies of her mother, her father, and Mr. and Mrs. Ha with their small baby. She finds that her 4-year-old little sister has escaped the fate of being slaughtered. The 2 sisters live on puffed rice and rice crusts for days until they are rescued by their neighbors. Rabe stood up abruptly, looking at the grainy images in silence. I've got to get a copy to the Führer as soon as I can. He might have second thoughts about Japan. I wouldn't count on it, Magee replied.